Wales looks small on a map. Mountains in the north, old mining towns in the south, castles everywhere in between. Most people think they already know what they are looking at. Almost nobody thinks to look underneath it. Because beneath quiet Welsh reservoirs are roads, farms, and the remains of communities deliberately flooded out of existence. Inside mountains are prehistoric mines dug thousands of years before the Romans arrived. Beneath beaches are forests that vanished when the coastline moved. And inside one cave is evidence of a man buried here more than 30,000 years ago. The deeper you go, the older Wales gets. And by number 1, you will understand why the country on the map is only the newest version of the one underneath it. 25. The bridge, built 3 times. At Devil's Bridge in Ceredigion, look over the edge and something immediately seems wrong. There is a bridge underneath the bridge, and underneath that is another one. 3 crossings occupy almost exactly the same spot above the River Mynach. The oldest surviving bridge is medieval. Another was built above it in the 18th century, and a third went over both in the early 20th. Nobody removed the previous solution. They simply kept building upward. Below them, the river cuts through a steep wooded gorge and plunges over waterfalls, which explains why local legend eventually claimed the devil built the original crossing. The legend is not true, but stand above that gorge and you understand why people thought ordinary humans needed help. 24. The church gravity cannot finish. St. Martin's Church at Semioy looks wrong before you know anything about it. The tower leans, the walls twist, the floor slopes, and different parts of the building appear to be moving in different directions. The problem is underneath it. The church stands on unstable ground affected by ancient landslips, and centuries of movement have gradually distorted the structure. Yet it remains standing and is still used. Think about that. Generation after generation, watch the hillside slowly bend a stone church without quite managing to destroy it. Gravity has been working on St. Martin's for hundreds of years. It still has not finished the job. 23. The canal in the sky. Near Llangollen, boats cross the Dee Valley more than 100 feet above the river. Silt Aqueduct carries the Llangollen Canal through a narrow cast-iron trough supported on enormous masonry piers. Walk beside it, and you have a railing between you and the drop. Sit in a boat, and the other side can feel almost completely open. Water, boat, then empty air. Completed in the early 19th century, it was one of the great engineering achievements of the Canal Age, and more than 2 centuries later, boats still cross it. Welsh engineers effectively built a navigable river through the sky. But the deeper you travel into Wales, the more you realize people had been engineering this landscape long before anyone had iron. 22. The tomb waiting for one sunrise. On Anglesey sits Bryn Celli Du, a low grassy mound that is easy to underestimate until you step inside. A stone passage leads toward a chamber buried beneath the earth, and its orientation is associated with the rising sun around the summer solstice. That required more than moving rocks. Somebody watched where the sun appeared. Somebody decided that particular moment mattered enough to capture. Then people built a monument around it thousands of years before anyone wrote down the history of Wales. The builders left no instructions explaining what happened inside. They did not need to. The monument itself is still pointing toward the sky. 21. The tomb with its outside missing. Pentre Ifan in Pembrokeshire looks almost impossible. An enormous capstone appears to balance above the ground on narrow uprights, creating one of the most recognizable prehistoric monuments in Wales. But modern visitors are not seeing the structure its builders saw. The stones were part of a Neolithic burial chamber, probably covered by a larger mound. That covering disappeared over thousands of years, leaving the internal structure exposed. What remains is essentially the skeleton of the monument. We know people built it roughly 5,000 years ago. We know something about how they did it. What disappeared was their explanation for why. In Wales, the stone often survives longer than the story. 20. The village that made its name almost impossible. On Anglesey sits a place that turned one railway sign into an international attraction. The village was already known as Llanfairpwll, but during the 19th century, its name was dramatically expanded to Llanfairpwll Gwyngyl Gogorishvian Drob Lolantisilio Gogogosh, apparently as a publicity device. It worked almost too well. More than a century later, visitors still stop to photograph the sign and attempt the pronunciation, while the full name became more famous than the village itself. A Victorian marketing trick turned into one of the world's best-known Welsh place names. And that is about as light as this list gets, because from here, the landscape starts opening up. 19. The mountain that looks like Mars. Most of Anglesey is green farmland and low-rolling countryside. Then you reach Paris Mountain, and the colors change completely. The ground turns red, orange, yellow, and purple. Huge excavated pits cut through bare slopes, and strange pools sit inside a landscape that looks almost volcanic. During the 18th century, this became one of Europe's great copper-producing sites. Mining altered the ground so dramatically that centuries later, the mountain still carries the scars. Vegetation has never simply covered everything back up. Paris Mountain is still showing you exactly where people opened it. And farther south, there are Welsh mountains where the damage became so enormous that people effectively created new ones beside them. 18. The mountains that roofed the world. Across northwest Wales, enormous grey slopes rise beside the natural mountains. They look like scree until you realise much of what you are seeing is industrial waste. During the 19th century, North Wales became one of the great centres of global slate production. Quarries including Penrhyn and Dynawig expanded to astonishing size. Railways carried finished slate toward the coast, ports shipped it abroad, and Welsh stone ended up on roofs around the world. Everything that could not be sold stayed behind. Millions of pieces accumulated into vast tips that permanently altered the shape of the valleys. Humans cut so much stone from these mountains that the leftovers became part of the geography. 17. The mountains that are hollow. The slate industry did not stop at the surface. Tunnels disappear into mountains, chambers open behind quarry faces, and abandoned workings extend into landscapes that appear solid from above. Generations spent their working lives inside these places, cutting rock in darkness while the waste accumulated outside. Some workings later flooded, others were abandoned. Around Blaenau Festiniog, the boundary between geology and industry becomes almost impossible to read. Natural slopes sit beside mountains of discarded slate, while tunnels run underneath both. And this is the first point where Wales starts playing its trick on you. Leave an industrial scar alone long enough, and eventually people begin calling it scenery. 16. The valleys that once glowed at night. The South Wales valleys are green again, which makes it difficult to picture what happened here 2 centuries ago. Coal mines opened beneath the hills. Ironworks burned through the night. Railways filled narrow valleys. Spoiled tips rose above towns, and populations exploded because the ground contained exactly what industrial Britain wanted. Welsh steam coal became internationally famous and helped power ships far beyond Wales. Merthyr Tydfil became one of the great centres of iron production. These valleys were plugged directly into the Industrial Revolution, and the quiet slopes people see today were once filled with smoke, furnaces, and machinery. Nature came back after industry left. It did not erase what industry had done. We are not even halfway down, and already we have prehistoric tombs, hollow mountains, and landscapes humans physically rebuilt. But those are the easy ones because you can still see them. From here, Wales starts hiding things properly. Communities disappear. Forests go underwater. Roads lead toward places that no longer exist. And eventually the timeline stretches so far backward that castles and coal mines start looking almost new. 15. The town Cole turned into a capital. Modern Cardiff Bay barely resembles the industrial waterfront that helped create the city. As coal production exploded in South Wales, railways carried enormous quantities down from the valleys toward Cardiff's docks. Ships took it around the world. Money followed it back. The docks expanded, and Cardiff grew with them. At the industry's height, the city was connected to a global network built around black rock dug from Welsh mountains. Then the trade collapsed, the docks changed, and much of that world disappeared. Modern Cardiff grew on top of it. But the mines left something else behind in the valleys, and in one village that legacy became catastrophic. 14. The mountain that moved. On October 21, 1966, children were inside Pantglas Junior School in Aberfan. Above the village stood enormous tips of waste from the nearby colliery. Heavy rain had saturated the ground, and that morning, part of one tip collapsed. A mass of slurry and debris rushed downhill and struck the school and surrounding houses. 144 people died. 116 were children. What made Aberfan even worse was that concerns about the tips and water had existed before the disaster. For generations, people had been bringing unwanted material out of Welsh mountains and piling it above their communities. At Aberfan, part of that mountain came back down. 13. The valley rebuilt for a city 70 miles away. The Elan Valley looks almost completely natural. Great stretches of water sit between empty hills and forests, but several of those lakes are reservoirs created because Birmingham needed clean water. At the end of the 19th century, valleys were dammed, buildings removed and roads redirected. Then an aqueduct was constructed to carry the water more than 70 miles east, with gravity doing much of the work. Rain falling on remote Welsh hills could eventually emerge from taps in an English industrial city. The project was enormous, but one small ruined dam in this landscape tells an even stranger story because decades later, people came here to learn how to destroy dams rather than build them. 12. The dam blown apart on purpose. During the Second World War, engineers working toward what became the famous Dambusters operation needed to understand how dams could be breached. At Nanty Grow in the Elan Valley, a small masonry dam was used in explosive trials connected with that work. The famous bouncing bombs would eventually attack German dams hundreds of miles away, but part of the experimental story unfolded here in mid-Wales. The same landscape that had been engineered to trap enormous quantities of water became a place where engineers studied how to release it catastrophically. And even that is not the strangest flooded landscape in Wales, because the next reservoir has a community underneath it. 11. The village underneath the water. Lyn Selyn near Bala looks peaceful enough that you could drive beside it without knowing anything is wrong. Before the reservoir existed, this was the Tryweryn Valley, home to Capel Selyn, a Welsh-speaking community with houses, farms, a school, post office and chapel. Liverpool needed water and plans were made to flood the valley. Residents fought them. Welsh political opposition was overwhelming. The project went ahead anyway. Families left, buildings disappeared, and the valley was flooded in the 1960s. Capel Selyn became more than a lost village. It became a symbol of decisions being imposed on Wales from outside it. The water covered the community, but it failed completely to bury the story. 10. The wall that refuses to forget. Beside the A487 in Ceredigion stands an old wall painted with two Welsh words: Ceifiwch Tryweryn. Remember Tryweryn. The message appeared after the flooding and became one of the most recognizable pieces of political graffiti in Wales. It has been damaged, restored, and copied around the country. Think about the strange reversal. The village itself has been underwater for decades, but the instruction to remember it became more visible with every passing year. The place disappeared. The memory spread. And Tryweryn is not the only part of Wales sitting beneath water, because along the coast there are things down there that are thousands of years older. 9. The forest underneath the beach. When the tide retreats far enough along parts of the Welsh coast, dark shapes sometimes appear through the sand and mud. Get close, and some of them are unmistakable. Tree stumps. Thousands of years ago, areas now covered by sea were dry land supporting woodland. Sea levels rose, coastlines shifted, and those forests disappeared beneath water and sediment. Cardigan Bay eventually became associated with the legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod, a Welsh kingdom supposedly lost beneath the sea. The kingdom belongs to folklore. The drowned landscape does not. There really is an older Wales beneath the water. And once you know that, the hills inland begin looking different too. 8. The hills that are actually fortresses. Wales contains hundreds of known Iron Age hill forts. Once you learn what to look for, ordinary countryside starts changing in front of you. A hill has a ditch that geology did not create. A summit is surrounded by banks. A ridge has been deliberately enclosed. People reshaped these places more than 2,000 years ago, creating settlements, strongholds and centers whose exact purposes varied. The strange part is not simply how many survive. It is how little we know about the people behind some of them. Their names disappeared. Their political world disappeared. The earthworks remained. Wales has hundreds of monuments sitting in plain sight whose builders cannot properly introduce themselves. 7. The castles that were messages. The enormous medieval fortresses of North Wales are beautiful now. When they were built, beauty was not the point. After Edward I's conquest of Wales in the late 13th century, castles including Conwy, Harlech, Beaumaris, and Caernarfon rose across the north. They were military structures, but they were also declarations of control. Fortified towns developed beside them, and royal authority was made physically unavoidable in the landscape. Today, tourists photograph the walls. A medieval Welsh person looking at them after conquest would have understood a different message entirely. Somebody had arrived with enough money, labor, and military power to make their presence permanent. 6. The language the conquest never erased. Welsh belongs to a linguistic tradition stretching back to Brittonic languages spoken across much of Britain before England existed. Most related languages disappeared or retreated dramatically as the political map changed. Welsh survived conquest, union, migration, industrialization, and centuries in which English carried far greater institutional power. There were repeated predictions that it would eventually vanish. It did not. Hundreds of thousands still speak it, and in parts of Wales it remains an ordinary language of homes, schools, shops, and conversation. Castles could change who controlled the country. They could not completely change what everyone inside it spoke. 5. The mountain people mined before Rome existed. Now, the timeline drops. Beneath the Great Orme above Llandudno is a huge network of ancient copper workings. More than 3,000 years ago, Bronze Age miners were already following mineral veins into this mountain using stone and bone tools. Some passages are extraordinarily narrow, and the wider workings reveal a scale of activity that is difficult to reconcile with the simplistic image of prehistoric Britain. People were organizing labor, identifying valuable ore and digging deep underground centuries before Roman armies arrived. While ancient civilizations flourished around the Mediterranean, people in North Wales were crawling through darkness, extracting the metal that helped define the Bronze Age. 4. The footprints that appear when the tide goes out. Along the Welsh coast near Borth, low tides have revealed something even stranger than the ancient tree stumps buried beneath the sand. Preserved within layers of peat are footprints left by humans and animals thousands of years ago, when this coastline looked completely different. The people who made them were not walking along a beach. They were crossing wet ground in a landscape that extended farther west before rising seas transformed Cardigan Bay. Some of those prints survived because mud and peat covered them before the sea eventually claimed the area. That means when the tide strips the modern beach back far enough, you are not simply looking at evidence of a vanished forest. You are looking at traces left by people who actually moved through it. For a few hours, the sea exposes the surface of an older Wales, and then the tide comes back and hides it again. 3. The man buried during the Ice Age. In Paverland Cave on the Gower Peninsula, human remains discovered in the 19th century became known as the Red Lady of Paviland. The name was wrong. The individual was a young man, and dating eventually placed him more than 30,000 years into the past. Red ochre was associated with the burial, along with evidence showing this was no accidental death left in a cave. Someone had been deliberately laid here in an Ice Age landscape, radically different from modern Wales. Sea levels were lower, the coastline lay farther away. Cold-adapted animals occupied the wider region. More than 30,000 years ago, people were already treating their dead with care on land that would eventually become whales. 2. The coastline that swallowed another Wales. Put Paviland beside the drowned forests, and the scale of change becomes difficult to ignore. The shape of Wales itself has not been permanent. During colder periods, sea levels were dramatically lower, and land extended beyond today's coast. As ice melted, water rose, and those landscapes disappeared. Forests were drowned, coastlines retreated. Places where humans and animals once moved became seabed. That means the familiar outline of Wales on every modern map is temporary. There were older versions of this country, with different shorelines, different environments, and land where there is now open water. The sea did not simply surround Wales. Over thousands of years, it helped redraw it. 1. The country underneath the country. And this is what connects almost everything we have walked through. Wales is not hiding one secret. It is hiding earlier versions of itself. A peaceful reservoir can be covering a village. A beach can be covering a prehistoric forest. A green mountain can contain Bronze Age copper workings. A grey mountain can contain Victorian tunnels. A natural-looking hill can actually be an Iron Age fortress, softened by 2,000 years of weather. A modern capital can owe its growth to coal extracted from valleys that have turned green again. Even landscapes people visit because they appear wild can be industrial places in disguise. That is the trick Wales keeps playing. Industry leaves, grass returns, and a quarry becomes scenery. A village disappears, and a reservoir becomes beautiful. A fortress erodes until it looks like a hill. A forest goes underwater until the tide exposes it again. Thousands of years pass, and an Ice Age burial waits inside a cave, while the coastline outside changes beyond recognition. Wales keeps covering its previous versions without completely erasing them. So the next time you drive through a Welsh valley and think there is nothing there but mountains, look again. The mountain might be hollow. The lake might be covering a village. The hill might be a fortress. The beach might have a forest underneath it. And the empty ground beside the road may have mattered to people whose names disappeared thousands of years before ours arrived. The Wales everybody knows is the surface. The strange part is everything underneath it. Tell us about the old wall, ruin, tunnel, or forgotten place near you that everybody passes without knowing what is really there. Subscribe, because the next investigation is waiting for you right there on screen.